Who asked you the first question that really made you stop and think? You know, that question that begged serious thought, not just a knee-jerk reaction. For me, the question was asked while I was still the pastor at Madison Avenue United Methodist Church in Derby, the first church I served. This was back in early 2001. I'd already met Jane Koger, and she'd already invited me to begin a women's ministry retreat center at her ranch near Mattville Green. I'd already said yes. I'd talked with my district superintendent, and I was getting ready to go before the Board of Ordained Ministry to tell them that I wanted to take a leave of absence to start this retreat ministry. No one at the church knew about this. I know that because I was not ready to let anyone know about it. As much as I knew that this was the ministry that I was called to do, the ministry that I believed I was prepared and qualified to do, I still had some doubts about taking this step. I was leaving local church ministry, leaving a for certain job. In United Methodism, we're appointed, so it's supposed to be a pastor for every church and a church for every pastor. So it was basically a guaranteed job. I was leaving a house, a parsonage. I was leaving medical benefits, a regular salary, retirement benefits. One night after a council meeting, Lisa, a parishioner, and I were talking. And I don't even remember what we were talking about, and suddenly the question came out of her mouth. Billie, will you be able to do this ministry that you want to do here in the local church? I was stunned, and immediately tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't speak for a few moments. Lisa knew that she'd struck a chord with me, but she didn't know what or how. And because I wasn't ready to tell the congregation that I was taking steps to leave, all I could say to Lisa was, that's something that I'm going to have to give some serious thought to. I was astonished that this was the question Lisa asked, and it was so right on target. I told Lisa that was a question I'd been struggling with, and I was surprised that she'd asked it. She said it must have been a God thing because she wasn't sure where that question came from within her. I knew inside me it was the question that I needed to hear to help me know without a doubt that I was heading in the right direction at that time in my life. Now, I read about another young woman who was asked a question that made her stop and think. It was asked by her volleyball coach when she was a senior in high school. Now, understand that this young woman, until that moment, had only been asked questions by her parents and teachers, advisors and preachers. She'd been asked, what did she want to be when she grew up? And she certainly knew the answer to that question. She wanted to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or a preacher, or a teacher, a professional, and successful. She knew that. That answer didn't take much thinking at all. The coach's question, though, was, what difference do you want to make when you grow up? What difference did she want to make? She didn't know. She knew she'd have to think about that one. She couldn't get the question out of her mind. Over and over again in her mind, that question played. What difference do I want to make when I grow up? What difference do I want to make? I believe that Jesus knew the power of these intensely personal questions. He asked, who do you say that I am? And the disciples answered quickly, first saying, some say you're this, others say that, still others say something altogether different. The disciples were fine reporters of what they had observed. But who do you say that I am? Jesus' question made them think. And it wasn't enough to just report what they saw or what they heard from other people. Now the disciples had to think for themselves, for their own lives. And Peter was the one that answered, you are the Christ. I think that Jesus surely knew that this was a life-changing response. Peter had claimed Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, because God had revealed this to him. Peter stopped and listened inside for the answer. And Jesus, knowing he knew the answer, told Peter, "You are now Peter." Peter means rock. "And on this rock I will build my church." Peter was going to make a difference. Now this morning I'm going to lay a little Methodism on you. I know some of you came out of the United Methodist Church or the Methodist Church. But the idea of questions, as I thought about that, I thought about John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. He also valued the power of a well-placed, provocative question. He knew that thought-provoking questions enlivened people, people of action, not people of reaction. We know that John and his brother Charles started a small group in college because Charles was aware that he was living his life. He was having difficulty living his life, maintaining his spiritual growth. This was something that their mother, Susanna, taught to her 19 children. This group of men at the college they attended came together 3 to 4 nights a week for praying, examining their own spiritual lives, studying the Bible, and just meeting together in general. In addition, they took food to poor families, they visited lonely people in prison, and taught orphans how to read. And to me, that kind of sounds scriptural. I think they were called to do that. This group came to be known as the Holy Club by other students who saw these men as overly pious. The name Holy Club was intended as an insult, much the same. The name Methodism was an insult, much the same way that Christian was an insult in the beginning. Members of Wesley's Holy Club asked 22 questions of themselves 3 to 4 times a week as they gathered together. These questions are printed in your bulletin insert. I'm a visual person. I like to read along with a speaker or write along, so I wrote them down for you. Imagine being asked these questions 3 or 4 times a week in a small group. Consider them now as I read them aloud. And think about how you would, and I'll think about how I would answer them. Number 1, am I consciously or unconsciously creating the impression that I am better than I really am? In other words, am I a hypocrite? Now this could be done consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes it's good to ask a friend or a family member, how do you see me? How do I come across to others? Because we can't see it for ourselves sometimes. The second question, am I honest in all my acts and words? Do I exaggerate? And catch that word, all. All my acts and words. Do I confidentially pass on to another what was told to me in confidence? In other words, do I gossip? Do I tell a friend, now you can't tell anybody this, but so-and-so told me this? Do we pass things on to other people? Number 4, simply, can I be trusted? Number 5, am I a slave to dress, friends, work, or habits? And that's a question that could be asked today within our culture. It's a good question to ask. Am I a slave to dress, friends, work, or habits? Am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? Is it all about me? Is it all about how I feel or what happens to me or what I do? Is it all about me? Question 7. Did the Bible live in me today? How would one answer that question? Did the Bible live in me today? And do I give it, the Bible, time to speak to me every day? It probably means that I take some time to sit and read the Bible. Number 9, am I enjoying prayer? Have you ever considered the idea of enjoying prayer? A lot of times people call out to God in times of difficulty, in times of confusion or doubt. But do we enjoy prayer? 10, when did I last speak to someone about my faith? I believe that we're not very good at this in the United States. Faith is considered a private thing. We don't share it with others. My belief is that I need to share my stories to help make them real, and I need to hear the stories of other people, the stories of faith. But it's something that we don't do very well here. Number 11, do I pray about the money I spend? Now, I know this was very important to John Wesley because he said, make all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And he was known to live on 10% of his income and give 90% of it away. Most of us are not able to do that in this day and age. Number 12, do I get to bed on time and get up on time? Now my concern with this question is, who determines what's on time? My brother asked me one time, Billie, why do you go to bed so late? And I said, no, wait a minute. You go to bed at 10 and get up at 7. I go to bed at 1 and get up at 9. It's just a difference in perspective. So I'm not sure who determines what's on time. Maybe we do that for ourselves and we do it on a regular basis. Maybe that's what the question is about. 13, do I disobey God in anything? Anything. Wow, how can we answer that? I think about these men sitting around in a circle asking each other, sharing, do I disobey God in anything? Do I insist upon doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Now, as I thought about this question, I thought it could go either way. This could be, is my conscience telling me something that I do is wrong? Or is my conscience telling me I'm not doing something that's good, that I need to be doing? I thought about this week as I watched some videos on my phone about people holding up their phone cameras to video people that are in arguments or in trouble, and they're using their camera instead of helping the situation. Is that doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Wouldn't it be a better thing to do to help people rather than take pictures of them? 15, am I defeated in any part of my life? I think about a person of poverty who certainly could feel defeated. Also, a person of good means who has one bad thing after another happen to them. Coming out of COVID, I think many folks felt defeated. This would make a great Sunday school question, I think. I'd love to hear what you all think about all of these questions, but this one, am I defeated in any part of my life? 16, am I jealous, impure, critical, irritable, touchy, or distrustful? That's quite a list there, and I think we all experience that at some part. I think the idea in the Holy Club was to be honest and open about it. I had a friend post on Facebook last night that she was so pleased to come home to an apple pie that her wife made. She was so pleased to have a wife that could make her an apple pie. And I wrote in her Facebook, I replied, I'm jealous of that pie. And I really did. I would have loved to have a piece of pie. I think some folks distrust God at times. They don't know how to fully believe and trust in God. I watched a movie last night. It was one of those created by a church. I think it was a Baptist church. It was about a police officer whose dad died when he was maybe 7 or 8, and he just didn't trust God. Throughout his adulthood, he became a police officer, and the things he saw as a police officer were so horrid. Even on his first day of work, it was based on a true story, that he just couldn't trust God until he hit bottom, and his life changed once he started trusting God. Number 17, how do I spend my spare time? Now, I'm retired and I really don't want to talk about how I spend my spare time because I'm not quite as active as I would like to be or think I should be. How do I spend my spare time? 18, am I proud? Now, I think that there's proud like having an excessively high opinion of oneself, but there's also pride or being proud like that deep sense of pleasure or satisfaction as a result of doing something very well. So I'm not sure being proud is always a negative thing, that we can be proud of something that we've done. 19, do I thank God that I am not as other people, especially as the Pharisees who despise the publican? And in my notes I simply wrote, ouch, ouch. 20, is there anyone whom I fear, dislike, disown, criticize, hold a resentment toward, or disregard? If so, what am I doing about it? I think this is a great question. Am I trying to repair a relationship or learning how to live with it as it is? I read a book several years ago titled, I Thought We'd Never Speak Again. It was written by a woman whose father molested her as a child. And when she finally told her mother didn't believe her. And it really impacted their relationship together. And the author of the book said that my relationship with my mom was so important that even though we had a few years of separation where we just didn't talk, I wanted a relationship with my mom. So I made the effort to call her, to talk with her, and now we can go shopping, we can go to the movies, we just don't talk about my father. But my relationship was important. So she did something about the relationship that she had with her mom. Do I grumble or complain constantly? I think there's something in the scripture about mumbling and grumbling. And 22, is Christ real to me? Whoa, is Christ real to me? I had an experience, I might have shared it with you before, when this was probably 30 years ago now. It's impacted my life ever since. I'd lost weight, and I was starting to gain it back. And I called my doctor, and I asked for help to see the physiologist again that I'd seen before. And he said, Billie, send me your food diary for a week, and we'll go from there. So I honestly wrote down every potato chip and every fudgesicle, every cinnamon roll that I wrote that week. Not proud of it, but I did it. And I sent it to the doctor, and he had the physiologist call me. And Paul was his name. And Paul said, well, Billie, looking at your food diary, I'd say you're not really ready to lose weight again. And I was stunned. I couldn't speak. I was so shocked. That's not the reaction that I expected. I could not speak. And he finally said, well, say something. And I said, thank you, and hung up on him. I happened to be reading a book about healing for damaged emotions. And when I went back to my chair and picked up my book, I remember that the book talked about inviting Jesus into difficult situations into our lives. So I put the book down and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So I imagined the phone ringing again, and I got up out of my chair in my mind, picked up the phone, and it was Paul. And Paul said, Billie, I'm not sure you really want to lose weight. And I was stunned again. And because I had invited Jesus into this, Jesus took the phone out of my hand and said, Paul, I will help her. And he hung up the phone, and he put his arms around me. And I don't expect anybody to believe it, but I believed it, and I still do, that he put his arms around me. And we just kind of melted to the floor, and he held me there for a while until I could compose myself again. Not everybody has experiences like that. I invite you to think about how Jesus is real for you in your life. Now, these questions move this fellowship of men gathered together to think about issues of justice and mercy beneath what they found on the surface, beyond what was apparent. They really had to think deeply about their lives. Considering these questions was intended to move believers to be holy and just people by choice and intention. Some people have difficulty with that word holy. It doesn't mean special or sacred necessarily. Well, it does. Sacred and holy are interchangeable terms in English, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, and it means set aside. We are called to be set aside to be different than the culture around us, to be set aside and to be just people by choice and intention. Now, in 1987, I went on what was called the Walk to Emmaus. It's a spiritual renewal program intended to strengthen the local church through the development of Christian disciples and leaders. The program's approach seriously considers the model of Christ's servanthood and encourages Christ's disciples to act in ways appropriate to being a servant of all. The Walk to Emmaus gets its name from the story in Luke 24, which provides the central image for the 3-day experience and the follow-up. This chapter in Luke tells the story of that first Easter afternoon when the risen Christ appeared to the 2 disciples who were walking together along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. The 2 men were talking about what had happened to Jesus, and they appeared distraught from as far as we can tell. Jesus walked along with them and started explaining Scripture to them, and it ended up in a communion meal at the home of at least one of the disciples. The Walk to Emmaus was an incredible experience for me, sitting at the table with other Christians, focusing on what it means to be a Christian, hearing others tell their stories of faith. After the 3-day event, folks were encouraged to join what's called a reunion group, which usually has 6 to 8 people in it. They meet once a week. And the format of the meeting is structured similar to Wesley's Holy Club meetings that I told you about with the 22 questions. There are only 7 questions or areas of focus for a reunion group to consider weekly. And these are printed, I think, on the back side of your bulletin insert. The first thing a reunion group does is to review their service sheet, their spirituality, their study, their action. Every week, members are encouraged to have a plan to enrich their spiritual lives, to read a book about faith, and have an action in mind, like taking food to someone or helping someone with their studies or whatever it might be. And then they are asked, at what moment did you feel closest to Christ? And then, at what moment this week did you feel you were responding to God's call to be a disciple? Where did you participate in being the church this week, the heartbeat of Christ? In other words, how did you love others as yourself? How did you enhance the realm of God this week? And then, when was your faith tested this week through failure? It could be something in the weekly plan that didn't get done. It could be reacting to criticism. There are all ways that we can fail during the week. And the idea is, how are we tested by that? And then they were asked, what is your plan for spirituality, for study and action for the week to come, preparing for the next week, that action plan. And then they had prayers for special needs, one's own, for others in the group, and for people outside the group as well. And then a prayer of thanksgiving in closing. Well, when I came back from the Walk to Emmaus, it was held in Wichita, and lived in Salina at the time. And my husband at the time and I were the first people in Salina that we knew of that had gone to the Walk to Emmaus. So there was no possibility for a reunion group with other Walk to Emmaus folks. So I was intrigued by the idea of a group like this and was told that people didn't have to go through the walk to be in a reunion group. So I talked to 6 other women and told them about my experience on the walk, and talked about the Walk to Emmaus, or the reunion group, and showed them there's a little folder with all of the 7 areas in it. And the 6 women agreed to meet with me, and we met twice. The others all found the experience too intimidating for them. They felt guilty if they didn't complete their plan. It wasn't intended as an accountability group or a guilt group. It was intended to just share where we are in our faith walk. And it just was too intimidating for them. And it made me really sad, and we disbanded after the second meeting. I shared this idea, this concept of a reunion group with a woman 10 years younger than me. I was in my mid-30s, so she was in her mid-20s. Her name was Pam, and I explained it to her while she was waiting for rehearsal for the bell ringers at church. And she called me the next day, and she said, "Billie, I would like to try this with you." And Pam and I met once a week for 8 years,
Oh, wow.
answering these questions week after week. Doing this kind of work, this kind of sharing, doesn't automatically make one want to be a pastor. Pam was a brand new stay-at-home mom until her kids were all in grade school, and then she went back to teaching chemistry. I happened to become a clergy person. It wasn't necessarily because of the questions, but it certainly gave me things to think about, my faith walk and my purpose in life. Asking and answering these questions make us think. Make us think and also draw us closer to God. That's what this message is about today. We need to not be afraid of the hard questions. I encourage all of us to think about these tough questions. Who do you say I am? What difference do you want to make in the world? And all of these other questions I've shared with you. You know, there's another question that's not original at all. It's found in Micah 6:8. We can also consider the question, what does the Lord require of you? Do you know the answer? It's in the same passage. The answer is to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. The next question might be, how do we make these things happen out in the world every day? And you know what? Each one of us is an important part of the work of the body of Christ in the world, loving each other to the best of our ability, seeking justice and mercy, loving kindness, walking humbly with God. May God be with us each in our lives this week as we think about our faith in action. I've given you 22 questions to think about and 7 areas to ponder. Jesus' question, who do you say that I am? In your thinking, also consider that question the high school girl was asked. What difference do you want to make when you grow up? I think we're all still growing up. I think Jesus is still asking each one of us that question as well. Amen. Amen.